dive deep today. We're going to be exploring personal growth, but with a twist. We're going to be looking at it through the lens of a drummer.
Oh, interesting.
We're unpacking excerpts from Life in 8 Beats, a drummer's guide to personal rhythm, growth, and reaching your goals in 30 days. It's by Ramone Pickover.
Okay.
Now, I don't know about you, but using drumming as a metaphor for personal development, that immediately piqued my interest.
Yeah.
Luckily, we have our expert here to help us break down those intricate rhythms and uncover the deeper meaning behind these drumming analogies.
Yeah, Pickover, he does a great job of blending his drumming journey with these universal principles of self-improvement. Like right out of the gate, he starts talking about finding his own tempo.
Yeah.
Discovering drums at 8, but the real passion kind of ignited at 13.
Yeah, that's so relatable, right? A lot of us have those early encounters with the passion, but it takes time for it to really take hold. What was the turning point for you? Like, when did you realize, this is it, this is what I'm meant for?
That's a great question. I think for me, it wasn't so much a single moment as it was a gradual shift. But I think for Pickover, diving deeper into drumming at 13, really committing to practice is what fueled his fire. He talks about playing in various bands, exploring different genres, even sharing stages with big names like Fear Factory. So clearly, dedication and exploration played a huge role.
It's not just about finding a passion, but actively nurturing it, pushing boundaries, getting out of that comfort zone.
Right.
He then takes this idea of rhythm beyond music, connecting it to our everyday lives, our routines, productivity, even our well-being.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting, I think.
Yeah.
He uses examples like our heartbeat, the cycle of day and night, these natural rhythms we often take for granted. And what's fascinating is there's this growing body of research around circadian rhythms and how being out of sync with them can really negatively impact our health and well-being.
So Pickover's suggestion of creating rhythm intentionally in our lives it's more than just a nice idea. It's actually backed by science.
Absolutely, yeah.
But how do we actually do that? He mentions these self-assessment exercises in the book, things like a daily rhythm log and a productivity pulse check. What's the core purpose behind those?
I think Pickover emphasizes self-assessment because it's about understanding our own internal tempo before we can create a rhythm that works for us. It's like collecting data before making any changes. The daily rhythm log, it helps us to see those patterns, those disruptions in our day. And that's crucial for identifying those areas where we might be out of sync.
It's like becoming a scientist of your own life, observing those patterns, gathering data, using that information to make adjustments. It's so much more effective than just trying to force ourselves into a mold that doesn't fit.
It is, yeah, absolutely. And speaking of fitting into mold, Pickover's productivity pulse check really resonated with me because it's about figuring out when we are most focused and productive. And this ties into the concept of chronotypes, like those early bird versus night owl tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a great questionnaire called the Horn-Estberg Morningness-Eveningness Questionnaire that can help people identify their chronotype, which I think is a fantastic tool for understanding those natural productivity peaks and valleys.
See, that's the kind of actionable information I love. It's one thing to talk about these concepts, but it's another to give people the tools to actually apply them. Okay, so we're tracking our rhythms, we're figuring out our chronotypes, and then there's this well-being beat that Pickover mentions. Sounds pretty straightforward, but why is it so important?
Well, think of it like tuning a drum before you play. If the drum isn't tuned properly, it won't sound right, no matter how skilled the drummer is. So this well-being beat, it's all about checking in with those foundational elements. Stress levels, sleep quality, emotional state. They're crucial for ensuring that we're in a good place to actually make progress.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the hustle and forget about those basics. But Pickover's reminding us that well-being is really the bedrock of everything else.
It is.
And once we have that foundation in place, he introduces this idea of using a map to get from point A to point B in life. But he says it's not just about goal setting.
Right.
It's about honestly assessing where we are right now, our strengths, our weaknesses, our values, and crucially, those limiting beliefs that might be holding us back.
Absolutely.
Now, for our listeners who might not be familiar, can you explain what limiting beliefs are and why they're so important to address?
Sure. Limiting beliefs are essentially those negative thoughts we have about ourselves that prevent us from reaching our full potential. They're often subconscious. They can stem from past experiences, societal conditioning. They sound like, I'm not good enough, I'll never be successful, or I'm not worthy of love. And these beliefs, they act as invisible barriers, stopping us from taking risks or pursuing our dreams.
So it's not just about setting goals, it's about clearing the path to those goals by identifying and challenging those limiting beliefs.
Exactly, yeah.
And that brings us to what I think is a core concept in the book, the drummer's mindset. Tell me more about this.
Okay, so this is where Pickover's experience as a drummer really shines through. Because he says that raw talent alone, it isn't enough. It's about showing up consistently even when you don't feel like it. Discipline, dedication, putting in the work. Essentially, it's about cultivating grit.
And there's so much research to back that up, right? I mean, I'm thinking of Angela Duckworth's work on grit and how it's a key predictor of success in any field, really. It's not just about talent, it's about that perseverance, that
Yeah.
ability to keep going even when things get tough. But isn't there a danger in overemphasizing grit? What about natural talent and aptitude? Are those not important at all?
That's a great point. While grit is undoubtedly crucial, I think Pickover would agree that natural talent and aptitude definitely play a role. It's about finding that balance, recognizing our inherent strengths, but also developing the discipline to hone those strengths and overcome challenges. Recognizing that mastery is a journey, not a destination, as Pickover so eloquently puts it.
And he links this directly to personal growth habits, right? Like having a dedicated space for practice, just like drummers do, creating routines, breaking down those big, overwhelming goals into smaller steps, just like learning a complex drum fill.
Exactly. And that's a key takeaway here. We often get discouraged when we set these massive goals, and they just seem impossible to achieve. But Pickover shows us the power of breaking things down into manageable steps. It's about making progress feel achievable, not overwhelming. Small, consistent actions over time lead to those significant results.
And he doesn't shy away from the fact that obstacles, plateaus, they're a part of the journey. He even reassures us that it's normal to get stuck sometimes, which I think is so important. But how does he suggest we navigate those moments when we feel like we're hitting a wall?
He approaches obstacles with that same methodical, step-by-step approach he applies to drumming. First, identify the specific obstacle that's tripping you up. What's the sticking point? Then, once you've pinpointed it, break it down, into smaller, more manageable chunks, just like dissecting a difficult drum fill.
Right.
Then, and this is crucial, seek support from others.
Yeah, it's funny how we often try to tackle things alone, even when we're struggling. But Tickover, drawing from his band experience, he really emphasizes the importance of collaboration and support. Sometimes we just need that outside perspective, right?
We do, yeah. A mentor, a coach, even a trusted friend can offer insights that we might be blind to. They can help us see the obstacle from a different angle, offer alternative solutions, or, simply provide that encouragement when we need it most.
And that brings us to Pickover's final point on overcoming obstacles, changing your perspective.
I love that he includes this because it's so powerful. Sometimes the obstacle isn't the obstacle, it's our perception of it. And by simply shifting our mindset, reframing the situation, we can unlock new possibilities.
Yeah, it's like that famous quote from Wayne Dyer, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And Pickover encourages us to find that shift through experimentation, trying new approaches, being open to different solutions. And amidst all the hard work, the discipline, the challenges, Pickover doesn't forget the importance of celebrating those small victories along the way.
He's almost evangelical about this, and it's so refreshing. It's easy to get caught up in the pursuit of those big, audacious goals. But those smaller wins, they fuel our motivation. They keep us moving forward.
And he uses those concrete examples from drumming to make it relatable, like nailing a difficult drum fill or performing well on stage. But how can our listeners who aren't musicians apply this principle of celebrating those small victories to their own lives?
It's about recognizing and acknowledging those small steps forward, no matter how insignificant they may seem. Did you stick to your workout routine today? Celebrate it. Did you finish that challenging task at work? Give yourself a pat on the back. Those small wins, when consistently acknowledged, they create this positive feedback loop,
Yeah.
reinforcing those behaviors and keeping us motivated in the long run.
It's like building momentum, right? Each small victory propels us forward, makes those bigger goals feel more attainable.
It does, yeah. And this ties into, the psychology of positive reinforcement. Like B.F. Skinner's research showed that rewarding desired behaviors, even with those small rewards, is incredibly effective for shaping those behaviors over time. So celebrating those small victories isn't just about feeling good in the moment. It's actually wiring our brains for success.
So we've talked about finding our rhythm, setting goals, overcoming obstacles, celebrating those wins. But Pickover also dives into the importance of tuning into our inner world, exploring that inner landscape. through a chapter he calls Listening Inward.
Right. He uses this brilliant analogy of an inner sound engineer.
Hmm.
The idea that we need to become aware of our internal state, our thoughts, emotions, motivations, in order to adjust and refine them. Cultivating self-awareness, which is really the foundation of any personal growth journey.
I love that image, the inner sound engineer constantly monitoring, tweaking our internal soundscape. But how do we actually access that control panel? How do we become more attuned to those inner workings?
Well, Pickover suggests practices like mindfulness and journaling, which are fantastic tools for developing that inner awareness. Mindfulness is all about paying attention to the present moment without judgment. Observing our thoughts and feelings as they arise without getting swept away by them. And journaling provides a space for us to process those thoughts and emotions, to identify patterns and gain a deeper understanding of ourselves.
So it's about creating that space for reflection, that pause in the midst of the daily chaos to check in with ourselves and see what's happening beneath the surface. But what about those times when our own self-perception might be clouded?
That's where Pickover emphasizes the importance of feedback from others. He recognizes that we often have blind spots when it comes to ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes, we need that outside perspective to help us see things more clearly.
It's like holding up a mirror, right? And sometimes we need someone else to hold that mirror for us, to reflect back what we might not be able to see on our own.
Absolutely. And it's not always easy to hear that feedback, especially if it's critical. But, Pickover encourages us to approach it with an open mind, a willingness to learn. After all, feedback is a gift, right? An opportunity for growth and self-improvement.
And speaking of self-improvement, Pickover ties this idea of listening inward to the concept of finding our authentic voice, a chapter that really resonated with me. He starts by drawing a parallel to drumming, how each drummer has their own unique style and sound. And he encourages us to embrace that same individuality in our own lives, to discover and express our authentic selves.
Right.
It's about owning our strengths, celebrating what makes us unique, and not being afraid to challenge those fears that might be holding us back.
Absolutely. And it's not just about self-expression. It's also about aligning our actions with our values.
Mm.
Living a life that feels true to who we are at our core. Finding that sweet spot where our passions, talents, and values intersect.
And that takes experimentation, right? Pickover talks about his own journey of exploring different genres of music, pushing his creative boundaries, allowing himself to evolve as a drummer. He's giving us permission to try new things, to step outside of our comfort zones, to discover those hidden talents and passions we might not even know we have.
He is, yeah.
Yeah.
It's about embracing that growth mindset, that belief that we can always learn and evolve, and that the journey of self-discovery is a lifelong adventure. And it's about recognizing that our authentic voice might not be a fixed point, but rather a constantly evolving expression of who we are.
So we've talked about finding our rhythm, setting goals, overcoming obstacles, celebrating those small victories, tuning into our inner world, embracing our authentic voice. And now Pickover throws us a curveball with a chapter titled Time Signatures of Life.
Oh yeah, this is where he reminds us that life, it's rarely predictable. Full of those unexpected twists and turns, just like a song can shift tempo or time signature. It's about embracing the unpredictable, developing that resilience to navigate those changes with grace and adaptability.
It's a shift in mindset, isn't it? Instead of fearing change, trying to control every aspect of our lives, Pickover is inviting us to surrender to the flow, to dance with the unexpected, to see those challenges as opportunities for growth and transformation.
It is, yeah. And he offers some great tips on how to cultivate that resilience. Things like building coping mechanisms for stress and anxiety, strengthening our support systems, trusting that we have those inner resources to navigate whatever life throws our way, developing that inner drummer, so to speak. That can keep the beat even when the music changes.
And speaking of music, Pickover uses the analogy of a band to explore the complexities of relationships, a metaphor that feels both familiar and insightful.
It is, yeah, a perfect analogy. Just like each musician in a band has their own unique role to play, each person in a relationship brings their own strengths, perspectives, needs to the table. And just like in a band, successful relationships require that clear communication, active listening, a willingness to compromise and collaborate.
He gives those concrete examples from drumming, like the drummer listening to the bassist, locking in with the guitarist, responding to the vocalist's dynamics, and it beautifully illustrates the importance of being attuned to the other people in our lives.
Yeah, It does. It's about going beyond just the words we say and paying attention to those nonverbal cues.
Yeah.
Understanding the other person's perspective, creating a space where everyone feels heard, respected, and valued.
And just like in a band, healthy relationships require boundaries. Pickover talks about the importance of knowing our limits, communicating our needs clearly, even if it means saying no sometimes. It's about finding that balance between nurturing those important connections and protecting our own energy and well-being.
Right? He's essentially saying we can't pour from an empty cup. We need to take care of ourselves,
Mm.
both individually and, within the context of our relationships, in order to show up as our best selves for others.
And this brings us to a concept that's central to both drumming and personal growth: improvisation. Pickover encourages us to embrace improvisation in our lives, to develop that ability to think on our feet, to respond creatively to those unexpected situations, and to find joy in spontaneity.
Right.
He highlights those benefits so beautifully: handling the unexpected, becoming more creative problem solvers, being more spontaneous. It's about letting go of that need to control everything and embracing the unknown with a sense of curiosity and adventure.
Exactly, yeah. And it ties back to that drummer's mindset we discussed earlier, that willingness to take risks, to experiment, to make mistakes and learn from them. Seeing those quote unquote mistakes as valuable feedback, as opportunities for growth and learning rather than failures.
Pickover then shifts gears a bit and talks about performance and presence, using that concept of stage presence metaphorically to apply it to any situation where we need to show up with confidence and authenticity.
Right? He talks about owning your space, projecting your voice, communicating with impact. And while he focuses on those outward expressions of confidence, he also acknowledges the importance of the inner work. Managing those nerves, cultivating self-belief, and embracing vulnerability.
He even offers some practical tips on things like body language, voice projection, which can be incredibly helpful for those who might feel intimidated or unsure of themselves in those high-stakes situations.
Absolutely, yeah. And it all ties back to that idea of authenticity. True confidence comes from being comfortable in your own skin, embracing your strengths, and being willing to show up as your true self, even when it's scary. Recognizing that vulnerability is not weakness, but rather a strength that allows us to connect with others on a deeper level.
And that brings us to the final chapter of Pickover's book, Sustaining Grace, where he offers guidance on how to keep that momentum going, how to turn those fleeting bursts of motivation into lasting positive change.
He emphasizes the importance of creating a practice routine for personal growth, just like a drummer has a practice routine for music. It's about incorporating those daily habits that keep us moving forward, you know,
Oh.
those consistent actions that nourish our mind, body, and spirit.
And what are some of those key habits that he recommends?
Well, he talks about the importance of daily reflection, setting aside time each day to review our progress, celebrate our successes, identify those areas where we can continue to grow. It's about staying mindful of our goals, our values, our overall well-being.
It's so easy to get caught up in the daily grind and lose sight of those bigger aspirations. So that reminder to incorporate daily reflections, such a simple yet powerful practice.
It is, yeah. And he also emphasizes the importance of, those mindfulness practices, incorporating those moments of present moment awareness throughout the day to help us manage stress, regulate our emotions, and cultivate a sense of inner peace.
So it's about integrating those moments of pause, those breaths of fresh air amidst the chaos of our busy lives. What else does he suggest?
Well, he encourages us to embrace lifelong learning,
Yeah.
to stay curious, to seek out new knowledge and experiences, to expand our horizons.
It's about cultivating that growth mindset, the belief that we can always learn and grow, no matter our age or experience level.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be, formal education. It could be reading books, listening to podcasts, taking online courses, attending workshops, or simply, engaging in conversations with people who challenge our perspectives. It's about staying curious, open-minded, and eager to learn.
And finally, he ends the book on a beautiful note with leaving a legacy. He ties it back to his drumming experience, talking about how each drummer leaves their own unique mark on the world through their music. But he broadens it to apply to all of us, encouraging us to think about the impact we want to have, the legacy we want to leave behind.
He does, yeah.
It's a powerful reminder that we all have something unique to offer, and that our lives can have meaning and purpose beyond ourselves. It's about making a positive contribution, whether it's through our work, our relationships, our creative endeavors, or simply the way we live our lives.
And what I find so inspiring about Pickover's approach is that, he doesn't prescribe a specific path or formula. He simply invites us to reflect on our own values, passions, and aspirations, and to consider how we can use our unique gifts to make a difference.
It's a beautiful way to end the book, leaving us with a sense of hope, possibility, and a renewed commitment to living a life that matters.
It is. It's a reminder that we're all part of something bigger than ourselves, and that even the smallest actions can have a ripple effect that extends far beyond our own lives.
So we've really delved into the heart of Pickover's book here, exploring his drumming-inspired insights on everything from finding our rhythm to leaving a legacy. Before we wrap up, I want to hear your personal takeaway. What resonated with you most from this deep dive?
Well, for me, I think what really stuck with me was that very first chapter when Pickover talks about finding his tempo. It's so easy to assume that someone, as accomplished as him was always just like naturally passionate about drumming. But when he describes that initial spark at 8 years old, and then how the real fire didn't ignite until he was 13, it's a good reminder that passion isn't always this like constant blazing force, even for those who reach incredible heights. It can evolve.
Hmm.
It deepens over time.
It's encouraging for anyone who feels like they haven't quite found their thing yet, or maybe their passion isn't this explosive, all-consuming fire. Pickover shows us it's okay for those passions to simmer for a while, to slowly build before they really become a driving force.
Yeah, it's like those slow-burning embers,
Ew.
that suddenly catch fire when the conditions are just right. And that's what I appreciate about Pickover's whole approach to personal growth. It's not about forcing ourselves into some kind of mold. It's about finding that unique rhythm that works for each of us individually. Acknowledging that our tempo, it might change over time, and that's perfectly okay.
Yeah, he's basically saying don't compare your rhythm to someone else's drumbeat. We each have our own cadence, our own way of moving through the world. And the key is to honor that, to find that tempo that feels right for us, that feels authentic.
And to embrace that journey
Hmm.
with all of its unexpected twists and turns, the pauses, the accelerations, the times when we might feel completely offbeat. Pickover encourages us to find the beauty in those moments, to learn from them, to trust that even when we feel lost, we're still moving forward in some way, still creating our own melody.
I love that, creating our own unique melody, because it reminds us that personal growth, it isn't a linear path. It's more like a composition, full of highs and lows, moments of brilliance, moments of dissonance. But it's a journey of self-discovery, a journey of creative expression.
And one that requires us to be the composer, the conductor, and the performer of our own lives. And I think Pickover gives us the tools and the encouragement to step into those roles with confidence.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. Pickover's book, Life in 8 Beats, is such a unique and insightful look at personal growth. And your expertise has brought so much depth to our discussion today. Thank you for joining me on this rhythmic journey.
The pleasure was all mine. I think Pickover's approach is a breath of fresh air. It reminds us that personal growth can be meaningful and enjoyable, a process of self-discovery that's infused with rhythm, with passion.
For our listeners, if you're looking for a new perspective on personal growth, one that's infused with, well, rhythm and metaphor, definitely check out Life in 8 Beats. It's a book that will stay with you long after you've finished it. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought, inspired by Pickover's work. Imagine what the soundtrack of your life would sound like. What rhythms would it contain? What instruments would tell your story? What emotions would those melodies evoke? Let that soundtrack be your guide as you continue to create your own unique and fulfilling life. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep listening to the beat of your own drum.